Good morning. Good morning. I'll invite everybody to come forward and grab a seat. It is good to be among friends. Welcome, students, faculty, staff, and friends of Wake Forest University School of Divinity. It is wonderful to see you here today, and we are so grateful to have you here to celebrate 25 years of Wake Forest University School of Divinity. Because that's 25 years of forming faith leaders for the gospel ministry, sent out to churches and communities far and wide to advance the values of our school: justice, compassion, and reconciliation. Over 25 years of the spirit of Wake Forest University School of Divinity, this spirit has grown and touched the lives of 665 students, who in turn go out and bring healing, holy challenge, and wholeness to the individuals and communities that they serve. So today we have much to celebrate, but our celebration is not confined just to the past. And in God's abundance, our celebration here today is also about the future. We are here today to dream. We are here to dream about what the future will be for Wake Forest University School of Divinity. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the podium a fellow dreamer who will dream alongside us. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed dean, the fifth in Wake Forest University School of Divinity's history, Dr. Corey D.B. Walker.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and good morning, everyone. Today, we're looking forward to a day filled with wondrous fellowship, deep intellectual stimulation, and faithful worship, celebrating the 25th anniversary of Wake Forest University School of Divinity. I'm pleased that today we're being anchored by two conversations by our distinguished faculty of divinity. They will provide us with an intellectual preview of a series of essays that will come out later next year on celebrating the 25th anniversary of Wake Forest University School of Divinity. And they will engage a most pressing question that was posed by Dean Bill Leonard 25 years ago on October 12th, 1999. It was then where Bill Leonard stated, "On the threshold of a new century, Wake Forest University begins a divinity school, and the faculty has asked me what it might mean. Struggling for a handle, I lighted on Emerson, less for his transcendentalism, as fascinating as that may be, than for his wonderful imagery. Not instruction, but provocation. It is a dangerous line and an even more dangerous idea. Provocation, the dictionary says, can be to incite to anger or resentment, a frightening possibility in any school and not desired here. But it can also mean to stir, to challenge, and to call forth. So tonight, let us say, at least in part, this new school seeks to provide not simply instruction, but provocation that stirs up students, challenging them and calling forth from their ideas and issues to help form a new Christian ministry. A quarter of a century later, the Faculty of Divinity here at Wake Forest University continue to confront the central thrust of what Dean Leonard engaged, namely, what does it mean for Wake Forest University to have a divinity school? And while the times and circumstances that elicited Bill's response are different from our current moment, the question is still relevant a century later. What is pressing us? What is pressing Wake Divinity beyond our certainty, ourselves, demanding more than we ever dreamed of? Joining us in our first conversation will be our colleagues, our moderator, Jill Crainshaw. Jill is Vice Dean for Faculty Development and Academic Initiatives and Professor of Worship and Liturgical Theology. Come on. Joining Jill will be the following faculty members: Gary Gunderson, Professor of Faith and Health of the Public. Come on forward, Gary. Kevin Jung, Professor of Theological Ethics and Moral Philosophy. Alton B. Pollard, the James and Marilyn Dunn Chair in Baptist Studies and University Professor of African American Studies. Melva Sampson, Assistant Teaching Professor of Preaching and Practical Theology. John Senior, Assistant Dean of Vocational Formation and Director of Doctoral Education. And Wimberley Wimberley, Assistant Teaching Professor of Practical Theology. Jill and colleagues, the conversation is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Wow, what a gift that we can spend time together this morning, celebrating, remembering, and looking forward. So one word comes to mind for me, and that word is gratitude. We gather here in this space where so many Wake Foresters have gathered for all kinds of lectures and concerts and prayer over many years. And also in a space where 25 years ago, Wake Divinity emerged as a new professional school on the university campus. And gosh, I'm really remembering that today because we have a row of our inaugural class sitting there. And though that was a quarter of a century ago, when I saw them come in, the years fell away, and I thought about those early days in classrooms where so much was exciting and courageous and liminal. Talk about uncertainty. There was not much of that in those early days, and I don't think there's much of that now either. And so what we're here to talk about and to celebrate is this journey toward understanding that we've undertaken as a school beginning a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago, with an inaugural class of students who took a risk and showed courage and heart by coming here. Across all of those years, and 600 some alum later, and current students and donors and supporters and teachers and others, it's really been an amazing journey. And again, my word today is gratitude for all the ways that people have given of themselves. And I think that's actually the theological key to the future. And it's a kind of radical, for me, radical gratitude that births not just hope, but hope that is grounded in justice. Hope that is grounded in faith that has deep roots and that cannot be shaken, but that can also grow and expand and see new light as it emerges into the horizon. So those are some of the things that motivate me to be here today, but the primary reason we're having this conversation is to answer those powerful questions. What does it mean for Wake Divinity to be a part of this university? And what in our lived experiences and world is pushing us beyond certainty, calling us to dream a horizon more expansive than we have ever imagined? What hopes and dreams call us to act with radical courage and hope? As a school, but also as a people gathered here today. These are questions that I've heard echoing in our hallways. They have challenged us in our classrooms over the years, and they spill over onto meal tables, for when we break bread together, the Spirit is in our midst. So today, I hope these questions are sparked and wisdom, infused with wisdom by my colleagues, but also by the conversations we share together. I hope we fill this space with wisdom as we think about the future, the next quarter century, the next however many years of Wake Divinity, as we think about what it means to live lives that are compelled by hope, that's rooted in a theological value that matters to us. That's a powerful, powerful thing. But how we do that is a question that remains out there awaiting our response. Now, I have some brilliant colleagues here, and for them I have a special gratitude, because over the years, as I've shared these hallways and offices with folks like these, I've gained much wisdom. And I've learned new questions that I never thought to ask before. So I carry in the marrow of my bones 25 years worth of faculty colleagues who have asked really important and powerful questions. And I'm excited about what we will hear from them today. So join me in welcoming each of them. And what will happen is each of them will talk for 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5. And then we will have a conversation together about what they've said, about what you've heard, and about what we are imagining for the horizon as we look to the future. So thank you, colleagues, for your presence, for your gifts of wisdom. Let's talk. And so we'll jump right in. Gary, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I had a hunch that was going to happen. I have a little longer perspective than most. I go back before 25 years. I watched Iron Butterfly play Inagata Davida here in the chapel quite some time ago. About a quarter of the graduates of the Divinity School have always found their professional calling into healthcare, and often as chaplains and other roles. I sort of came the other way. Most of my academic training, all of my academic training has been theological, but for much of the last 30 years, the domain of theological application has been in structures that were built for public health or healthcare, including 2 large academic medical centers, one begun by Methodist in Memphis, one begun by Baptist here. Most of my writing, both popular and peer-reviewed, has always been about that practice of theology in health structures. But only since my div school role has become more the center of my life in the last couple years have I actually turned towards theology informed by, but not contained by, the field work of health and public health. What are the theological implications now visible from that life I've spent working in the health science domains? The most basic theological insight is the subject itself. Almost all that public health thinks about is what the negative phenomena are that are trying to kill us. Healthcare, as hospitals, are even worse, almost entirely obsessed with pathology and death, ailments that are quaintly called complaints. But most of what they want our graduates to do is to be present at the end of life, not thinking about life. Some years ago, I spoke at a big deal conference instead of President Carter. Imagine the disappointment of the audience. I followed Dr. David Williams, now of Harvard. He spoke about the relationship between race and health in America, and said pretty much everything that can be said about race and death in America. I had nothing to add to the study of death. But for the first time, and pretty much every time since I have had a microphone in my hands, I've spoken about the responsibility of intellectuals, let's just say grown-ups, to talk about the study of life. It turns out there are leading causes of life, just as there are leading causes of death, and this has profound theological implications. The first great theological metanoia is turning our imagination from death to life. The most obvious and overlooked witness, but it is overlooked. I have come that you might have life and life abundantly. The most radical, mysterious statement amid a world filled with suffering. Note that we theologians, in order to follow up on that radical intellectual metanoia, must find different thinking partners than our typical friends in the biomedical disease care organizations that have accepted our chaplains, but usually not our prophets, which might call into question their prophets. We need to hone our whole gospel, especially the social gospel, not just the parts that support their operational needs for care of patients at the end of life. Full band theology, not just vocational training that fits operational responsibilities. This is the provocation that the Divinity School is perfectly suited for, precisely because we are in the midst of academic institutions that actually are providing the leadership training for those leading these other organizations. Provocation, not compliance. That's the theological metanoia that this day calls for and the next 25 years calls for.
Thank you.
They say it is the holy grail of all physics, a theory of everything. A united theory that can finally unite, reconcile the two major theories of physics, the theory of general relativity on the one hand, and the standard model of particle physics. The theory of relativity, general relativity, models gravity on a large scale in a curved space-time. The standard model of particle physics models non-gravitational forces on the smallest scale through the quantum fields of particles. So the biggest scale and the smallest scale. The best thing about the theory of everything, if it is ever possible, is that it will take one simple mathematical equation to explain all aspects of the universe. And you can wear it on your t-shirt. Okay, so let's talk about the math. Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. We are on PBS Nova, right? Actually, I would leave physics to Brian Greene and Sylvester Gage to explain string theory and supersymmetry. I only know how we human beings came into being. In the beginning, God created the earth and the garden, and God realized that he needed somebody to mow the lawn, so he created the human beings. Don't believe me? Ask Dr. Walls, right? If you're not familiar with this creation account, that's because it's not in the canon. Now back to the theory of everything. Planets, stars, and galaxies. The theory of general relativity proved itself accurate and useful, but it is not the best when explaining the behaviors of subatomic particles. Likewise, I think it is often the case that when we are too focused on our own successes in figuring out the things that are mechanical in the fabric of the universe, we often miss out on the things that are meaningful and valuable in the fabric of a human heart. As St. Augustine says in the Confessions, I know Dr. Leonard will like this. Book 5, chapter 3, he says, we can explore what lights our night sky and predict the eclipses of the sun and the moon And we may be even amazed at our ability to predict those eclipses with such a precision. But then we may actually fail to notice the eclipse of our own heart when it is happening. As Bonnie Tyler sings, once upon a time, I was falling in love, but now I'm only falling apart. There's nothing I can do. A total eclipse of the heart. So, what is the role of academic theology in the contemporary university? Can theological education coexist with the natural and social sciences and other disciplines in the humanities? I believe that a comprehensive theory of everything, which aims to unify our understanding of the underlying processes behind all phenomena in the universe, is not complete without exploring the nature of human phenomena, including our innate desire to understand reality and also validate our reason of being in this vast and seemingly meaningless universe. After all, we human beings are part of this universe, though we may expire at some point. Now, what are the biggest questions in the universe? We must put questions about the origin of the universe, the nature of time, the beginning of life on this list. But I think that the list should also include our own place in this vast and seemingly meaningless universe. Why do I say seemingly? That's because I think once we include theology in that simple mathematical equation, everything, the theory of everything may finally tell us not only the nature of stars in the night sky and the molecules in our heart, but also how to discover meaning in the stars, discover meaning written in the stars and written in the scars of the heart that we have. If St. Augustine is right, it is God who gave us this intelligence to understand reality, but also the heart to love the ground of all being for our own good. Now, it is for this reason I believe that theology has a legitimate claim to the contemporary university. Insofar as the human heart is a legitimate object of academic study, theology then has much to contribute to the theory of everything. Thank you.
I am honored to be a part of Wake Forest University School of Divinity and to be a part of this wonderful 25th anniversary celebration. I have enjoyed returning to Wake Forest after these many years, and I am tasked today with speaking for a few moments on the gift of African American religious thought. Visionary African American religious thought. The pivotal shift in my career was the turn to theological education after teaching in undergraduate programs, including here at Wake Forest University for 10 years. However, the emancipatory intellectual project for me always remained the same: a focus on the particulars of being human, grounded in my scholarship on the gifts of Blackness. These gifts, I would contend, are indigenous and communal. They are the head and heart and hands of a people whose humanity has ever been contested, and who, despite our nation's halting movement toward our common humanity, remain unrelentingly committed to the creation of a better country 400 years and counting. There are two important characteristics of African American religious thought for Wake and for the School of Divinity that I want to highlight. It should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. There can be no real distance between our university's thoughts and actions if we are committed to the values of pro humanitate. The gift and promise of African American religious thought to the School of Divinity and our university is an informed and visionary call to rediscovery and recreation. It is the invitation of African American religious scholarship to us all to learn and to respond to systemic injustices in ways that enable us all to see reality differently, and once having seen it, to act accordingly. African American religious scholarship at the School of Divinity critically centers justice, integrity, and frontline inclusion. We honor the arc of progress made in the struggle toward human freedom, while addressing those structures that exploit and oppress us still, in the cruel collusion of patriarchy, racism, violence, and greed. We conduct research, cultivate solutions, engage in collaborative actions, and work to foster just and enduring change within our larger university and with our university's leadership. I want to be sure you hear this. Justice and equality are not inevitable. Dignity and equity are not fait accompli in our church, academy, or world. At the School of Divinity, the Harlem Renaissance, and Azusa Street, their spirits live on. Secondly, and as important, African American religious thought celebrates and confirms that building community at Wake is but prologue to the building of a better world everywhere. There are illuminating paths to the future in our university, and to advance pro humanitate, no less America's supposed dedication to a more perfect union, will require courageous, representative, nuanced, solution-oriented, strategic public conversations across our university and nation. African American religious thought at the School of Divinity resolves to be deeply relational, collaborative, creative, and supportive of forms of research, artistry, and application at the intersection of diverse fields, initiatives, programs, and schools across this university. At its very best, visionary African American religious thought endeavors to actively upend the hallmarks of our divides with a hermeneutic that transforms the very values and structures that gave rise to them in the first place. Historically silenced, unsung, and unknown, we lift every voice, particularly, but not only the voices of Black women and girls, non-binary people, Black men and boys, and all who have been demeaned and derided in our scholarship. In a complex, uncivil, and uncertain world, the near and long-term future of our School of Divinity and University calls for the mosaic of voices, the full spectrum of ideas and insights, if we would reconstitute our world. African American religious thought invites you and me to companion together in scholarship and faith. In this intellectual environment, we challenge you to rise to the task of declaring that all are welcome. Beloved community awaits.
Thank you to my esteemed colleagues, to Dean Corey Walker, and to all of you for being here. I want to frame my very brief remarks around theological, new locations for theological education under the idea of click, like, and share. I'm inspired by my colleague to begin in a narrative form. So I grew up seeing and believing in what millennials have christened Black girl magic. That which is the ability to speak things into existence, to create something out of nothing, to effect change by disrupting, dehumanizing narratives through truth-telling and justice-seeking. My great-aunt Susie was known for her ability to talk the fire out of a burn, an indigenous and folk healing practice that lessens the severity of the wound. The healer speaks a specific mantra and releases the pain of the burn to God. My grandmother was forced to leave school after finishing the 6th grade, yet her well of knowledge ran deep. Nez, as she was affectionately known, was regularly called upon in our community for her ability to create. With minimal description, she could bring a dead state of being back to life with a needle, some thread, and a little fire. My mother, Norvell, is proficient in symbolically wading in the waters of the clandestine to confront natural and supernatural imbalances caused by oppressive systems and humans who impose them. Early in the morning or late in the night, I have watched her make petitions to the sacred to increase her capacity to move through murky waters or any substance that impedes vision or resists free movement. And like my foremothers, my mother said, I came here with my own power. When I went off to graduate school 25 years ago, 1999, I encountered other women who possessed a similar spiritual force. This time they were preaching women. In a traditional Black Baptist church, ordained clergy women were a rarity, and the pulpit was off limits and not considered appropriate space for women's bodies. But in the Pentecostal church I started attending, preaching women outnumbered men. And when circumstances called for the gift of healing, the skill of exorcising an ill spirit or conjuring a miracle, the woman, co-pastor, and other preaching women were frequently summoned. In those moments, I was arrested with amazement, yet comforted by my familiarity with this power. I witnessed women wielding divine authority through preaching, and I knew that Black women's bodies yielded spiritual power. I was beginning to see that the male-dominated pulpit could not withhold the ashe, a mystical force and quality which makes words once uttered come true, that these fire-baptized and Holy Ghost women and Holy Ghost-filled preaching women embodied. In this digital age of theological education, what I just pointed out to you then is the importance for us to, as we look forward to the next 25 years, to remember the value of doing theology from alternative locations. Alternative locations are not new. What is new is brick and mortar. Brick and mortar in the ways in which we fail to remember, maybe not us in this room, but theological education is multidisciplinary. And the churches that we are often called to engage are polyvalent. So there are multiple conversations happening from alternative locations. And what I am suggesting in this space is one of the alternative locations that we need to engage is the digital space. It is necessary for us to know that folk have always communed, always engaged, always mediated religion from places that have been considered questionable. And as we move forward, it is imperative for us to consider the ways that digital religion, not online religion or not religion online, but online religion is effective. If we've not known anything from COVID-19, if we've not also known anything about the ways in which marginalized bodies use alternative locations to be embodied and to carve out spaces for them to perform in ways I'm going to go ahead and say what I was getting ready to say. I'm not going to censor myself. To perform in ways that colonize religion and oftentimes the academic industrial complex does not allow. So it is necessary and imperative. Lastly, Dr. Leonard ends his convocation address 25 years ago with saying that the church certainly is not dead, it's just sleep. And my question is, when will it wake?
Well, good morning. Morning. I think this thing's on. For many years, I've been curious about the question, who is the leader that we're training in theological education? And I think from the perspective of traditional theological curricula, if you ask that question, what those curricula say about the leaders that we're training is that they are paid full-time professionals who leverage the different resources of theological traditions to provide ministry through certain distinctive practices. I mean practices like worship leadership and preaching and pastoral care, church administration and the like. And that's not a bad model. I think one of the core premises of professional graduate level education is that we're forming leaders for relatively stable institutions. And the way that we know what kind of leaders those institutions need is through their stability. So in the medical school, they know what kind of doctors they need because they know what hospitals and clinics look like. Law school, they know what kind of lawyers they need because they know what firms and courts and other spaces look like, and so on. The challenge in our space is that the institutions for which we've traditionally prepared leaders are changing dramatically, and that's the nice way of saying it. The shape of Christian gathering is fundamentally changing. And so what that means is that we don't really know what kind of leader we need to prepare to serve those spaces that haven't yet emerged. Dr. Sampson's work in Proclamation is an incredible example of this. And what Dr. Sampson has done is reimagine the space while also leading in it, in digital space. And I think that's part of the work that we need to be doing. We need to be partnering with communities of faith to help them reimagine the nature of Christian gathering, and then think about, well, what kind of leader is needed for those spaces. But I also think we need to expand the model of leader that we have worked within that is oftentimes very practice-focused, focus on those distinctive practices. Those are good practices, but many students in our own school are interested in working, I would say most students in our school are interested in working in spaces in which those practices aren't relevant or not relevant in the traditional way. And so I've started to think less in terms of practices and more in terms of the spiritual dispositions that we need to encourage students to develop to answer the question, what is distinctive about the kind of leadership that theologically trained persons bring in any kind of space, not just the traditional ecclesial spaces that we all know. Now, a tension with this is that in many schools, especially Wake Forest, there is a model of formation we're working with that centers the idea of flourishing. I think God wants all of creation to flourish. But I think part of what's distinctive about the kind of formation that we have to offer is that we understand that God's deep affirmation of human experience isn't exhausted in flourishing. That's one piece. Another piece is that the conditions of flourishing are not a matter of individual agency, which I think is too often a problem with the way that we talk about that. So as I've started to think about these spiritual dispositions, I've been curious about how they accompany people who are navigating institutions that do not provide the conditions of their flourishing. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about things like hospitality and discernment and justice and prophetic imagination, all of the ones that my students in art of ministry have encountered, attention, presence, metanoia, and so on. But all of these, I think, are dispositions that prepare leaders to work within institutions to create the institutional conditions of flourishing, not just the individual conditions of flourishing. So that's where my mind has gone with this and what my little paper is focused on.
Roger. Okay, it's working. Good morning. I had just enrolled in seminary as a first-year MDiver. Unpacked my bags, looked around my new dorm room with a sense of satisfaction, and decided to take a stroll in the downtown area and possibly treat myself to a mango Snapple, just to get out and see my new surroundings in this quaint little college town. I remember being so excited about embarking on a new seminary journey in preparation for ministry. The air was crisp, the fall leaves were changing, and the town streets were bustling with people scurrying to make their final purchases of the day. As I walked down the street, I passed two white women. I smiled and said hello as I neared them, only to have them look past me as if I had not uttered a word, while in unison with the rhythm of synchronized swimmers, they proceeded to move their purses to the opposite sides of their bodies as a means of protecting themselves from the nearness of this brown body. On that evening, in that public square, this brown body was a problem. It was early Saturday morning, and I was at home reviewing my sermon for the next day, one last time. And being the Baptist preacher that I am, I still hadn't come up with a sermon close. Title and close. It just wasn't coming together for me, so I proceeded to go out about my day and headed out to the huge going out of business sale at the local Walmart, with the understanding that the sermon title and close would eventually come. While poring over unbelievable finds, I bumped into a clergy colleague who agreed that it wasn't a good time to engage in our usual preacher chat, since potentially there was a fishing rod in the sporting goods section with his name on it. Within seconds, he disappeared into the fray. An hour later, satisfied with my own great finds, I strolled over to the checkout line, completed my transactions, and headed towards the exit. Off in the distance, I could hear police sirens. And once outside, I noticed a growing crowd huddled in the parking lot as two police cars came veering onto the curb to a screeching halt in front of the store. I remember thinking myself, thank God I got out just in time. Someone has stolen something in the Walmart. When I heard an officer say, "Ma'am, drop the bags and step against the wall." In my attempt to move out of the way, along with the others who had just exited the store, I looked up only to find there wasn't anyone behind me. The officer was actually talking to me. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you again, drop the bags and step against the wall." I gasped. "Who, me?" "Yes, you. I'm asking you for the last time, drop the bags and get against that wall." In shock, I dropped my bags as they neared me with their hands on their guns. It just didn't make sense. I was mortified. I asked the officer, "Can you please tell me what's going on?" He responded, "Wait here until my partner returns." I noticed the crowd steadily growing. In that moment, I felt spectacleized by what George Yancey describes as the glaring white gaze and the ongoing murmurings of the crowd. After 20 minutes, I asked the officer again, and he responded, "Ma'am, there's been a robbery in the store, and you fit the description." In that moment, this brown body was a problem. As I reflect on my own shock and hesitancy as an adult upon being commanded by the police officers to drop my bags, I speak the name of Tamir Rice, fatally shot twice in the chest at point-blank range by a police officer. When that officer car came veering up onto the curb of the neighborhood playground while he was playing with a BB gun, in the horror of his death, I remember his little brown body was a problem. While visiting an academic institution, I had arrived late in the afternoon, only to find a nearly empty campus amidst fall break. Tired and hungry as dusk began to settle, I dropped my bags off at the conference center and proceeded to find my way across campus to the cafeteria. For some reason, I felt uncomfortable walking across the campus that evening, and out of the periphery of my eye, I noticed a figure slowly moving toward me. As I neared, I was able to make out the body of a female police officer. She was white, walking slowly toward me with her hand on her gun. She looked at me menacingly, and I politely returned the favor by way of an oppositional gaze, of which George Yancey refers to in his text, Black Bodies, White Gazes. This brown body was too free in her actions, too free in her responses, too free in her protests. In this moment, I remember Sandra Bland. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. This renowned quote from Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois' seminal work, The Souls of Black Folk, provides a resource for engaging contemporary issues around otherness in an increasingly diverse world. Mining from Du Bois' writings, we can see how our assumptions about people can impede the provision of culturally relevant caregiving. When I think about Dr. Leonard's 1999 address, he talks about theological provocation. At the core of my work with students in pastoral care counseling is a sense that culture is always in the room. Specifically, when taught by an African-American womanist theologian. And so I always invite students to bring their whole selves in the room. Bring your history, bring your religion, bring your cultural context, bring your family myths, bring your family legends, so that we can all hear, so that we can all be exposed, so that we can all learn from each other what it means to provide care with the other.
powerful words from my colleagues, worth sitting with. I think I could go back to divinity school to be in their classes. Almost could go back. And I guess there are a lot of people in our communities, colleagues, who wonder if theological education is a journey they want to take. And if they do, what will they take away from it? And we can't say what they'll take away from it, but we have hopes about what it will mean for them to come and study here. So I guess I'd be curious to know I think you've said, but maybe we could take it a step further and just think about, so when people get a Master of Divinity degree in particular, what are the gifts that they then have? What are they equipped to know, to do, and what do they know that makes them partners in transformation in their communities? Why an MDiv? Why theological education?
So the problem is theo. What the world wants of a divinity school is to produce people with skills and competencies that fit into the secular world. And we're not going to do it. We do produce theologically formed people who have room for a greater power in their life, what I have come now to call a theogenerative practitioner. And it's the theo that's the awkward part of that. And I think the challenge for us as a faculty, as the next 25 years of students, is to really struggle with what's it mean to have theo linked with an ology that is worth the intellectual, critical engagement of people who are forming their life around something greater than their own professionally formed competence. And so it's the theo that's the problem with which we must not stop struggling.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lot to think about. And I know I often think with students about what's theology got to do with whatever it is that we're working on in terms of community engagement or other kinds of things. It's really an important part of this. Theology, God, has a lot to do with it when it comes to theological education. Anyone else have some thoughts on why theological education, why it matters, what it contributes?
So my own perspective on the value of theological education is about looking oneself honestly and correctly in the mirror. And for me, theology plays the self-purification process. When we go to eye doctor for our eye exams, we try different lenses to see things more clearly. And we try different lenses. And, eventually we settle on the one that works the best. And I think that what theology does, and a good theology does, is that it lets us to see us in the clearest way, our wretched human condition, and our inability to redeem ourselves on our own, and the need to work with other people, and most importantly, to be the moon. Last week, in the night sky, we had that what's called the hunter's moon, the beautiful full moon. And when you think about it, yes, the moon is beautiful, but it's only beautiful because it reflects more sunlight. And I think that, we try to validate our own value, our own meaning. And I think that when what theology does is to let us to see that we are valuable, that we are being loved by God, and also to see other people in the same light, that they also carry the divine light in each one of them. And so I think, again, theology is the corrective lens that I think we can use. And I really cannot think of any other disciplines that does that job better than theology.
Theology, in some ways, or God talk is how I want to offer it, in some ways levels a kind of playing field. Because historically, in terms of the way that theological education has been institutionalized, theology has only been done by particular bodies, formally. Informally, we know, as I just said in my remarks, that particular bodies have always theologized from locations that were never honored. And so when people engage in a formal study of theology or in both an intellectual and spiritual exercise, it is, like my colleague Dr. Pollard has shared, we do not engage in this exercise of dividing justice and any other justice and righteousness, or we don't have the right then to ignore what Hill Collins says is the matrix of domination most visible in interlocking systems of oppression. Theology is also about unnerving and unearthing. You should be unearthed. You should feel absolutely uncomfortable. Absolutely. If you don't, I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. If you're not feeling away, if you're not grasping your pearls, mission is accomplished. Like I don't, At last, I will say, a theological education prepares one to be able to look through such a specific lens. I mean, we can engage with the law school, with the medical school, with arts and sciences. As a matter of fact, most of our faculty should be on some of these other committees when these other schools are engaging certain things, because we have the experience to talk about it, to talk about it from a lens, right, that is not self-righteous and that is not proselytizing, but from, as my colleague Dr. Jung just said, from an ethical space and an ethical lens, and also with a historical lens. And so I just think at the end of the day, who gets to engage God talk? Theological education levels that. At least we level that. At least let me run that all the way back. Wake Div levels that by making sure that bodies that live at various intersections are heard and have the opportunity to bring their lived experience to the forefront and to be able to talk about God from that particular lens, have it honored and be validated.
To build on what I said earlier, my theological imagination is oriented powerfully by the image of the risen Christ in John 20, who shows up behind these locked doors with these disciples who are terrified and breathes peace. But even having wrestled with and conquered death, the risen Christ still bears the wounds of structural violence and oppression. That's why flourishing is always ambiguous. And I think what theological education offers in terms of preparing leaders is, as I said before, leaders who really journey with people through different forms of death into new life, who understand that God's affirmation of human being is that life is the ultimate condition of our experience, and we have to go through death to get there. Not just physical death, but all kinds of death. And I don't know that there's a form of professional leadership that really emphasizes that distinction in the way that theological education does. So that I think is what the main contribution that we make in that way.
So I'm sure we could say much more about this in responding to this question, but we want to hear from you all if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of folks on our panel. Okay, do we have a microphone?
Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie. I'm a third year here, she, her pronouns. I appreciate the question about what is the value and importance of theological education, because I truly think that that is the question that needs to be at the forefront for all seminaries and divinity schools right now in the evolving landscape. I mean, admissions and recruitment and everything is down across the board, but I think it's because the framing needs to shift to have an understanding of what theological education is and what it does. And in this question and response, and I also know because I've been in many classes with Dr. Sampson as well, we are, as we were founded, a school that was intentionally founded to be inclusive, right? We are Christian in heritage, Christian foundation, Baptist in heritage, and ecumenical in outlook, right? In all of these conversations of theological education, yes, we are a Christian divinity school, but what does it mean as we are engaging? We have this upcoming initiative, Christian Jewish tradition, and the pluralism coming up. But what does it also mean is our responsibility in forming faith leaders emerging into the day as the landscape is ever evolving, the church is evolving, God Talk is coming back in the spring or December, I can't remember when, Dr. Sampson, you can correct me, when that's coming back for another viewing of what does it mean to continue to shape the spaces that we're going into that are Christian but not Christian. And what is the importance of how we were founded as Wake Divinity, being one of the youngest divinity schools, not seminaries, in moving that forward as we progress for the next century.
Are you addressing that to a particular person?
Maggie. What a beautiful question. A divinity school, by definition, must include nomenclatures of the sacred that are not Christian. If we are part of a university, which includes the universe of knowledge, then that means permutations of the divine that are familiar to us on the one hand, but also quite possibly unknown to us on the other, are all candidates for the invasion of our intellects and our spirits and our lives. And that's, for me, one of the great attractions of coming to an institution like Wake Forest, where we have a divinity school that encourages and invites, I pray, us to embrace the wisdom and knowledge that is found in law, that is found in healthcare, that is found in the natural and social sciences, that is found in every orbit of our intellectual universe. And not only to engage them there, but to bring what is for us the distinctive of the pervasiveness of that profound sense of something greater than ourselves to every endeavor that we meet. and in so doing, bring a different kind of gift to our colleagues, to our siblings in every discipline, in every school, in every department, and in every part of our university. And then inviting our learning community to take it from the university to the outer reaches of our world, into every community, every neighborhood, for those persons who have been considered significant, and especially for those who have been made bereft. For me, that is the beauty of a divinity. Seminary is good. Divinity school, even better.
And might I add that that requires a level of cultural humility, religious humility, a virtue, character development as part of spiritual formation for our students moving forward. And so engaging in the pastoral care classes that I provide, that is an invitation. If you have not been exposed to who or whatever, this kind of communal respect, honor, appreciation, deference, and humility for those things that we do not know, right? Not only as pastoral leaders, not only as social workers, not only as ethicists, not only as chaplains, but as students of life, students of pro humanitate.
Thank you. I want to conclude where I started, and that's with a word of gratitude. And I'm sitting here with colleagues who've spoken with such insight and wisdom, and gathered here with all of you to celebrate these 25 years that we've experienced together, but more than that, to look toward a really exciting horizon. And I think what comes to me in this moment, we asked this question, what is pushing us beyond certainty? And I think that's been a gift of the Divinity School all along, and will continue to. And it's a recognition that there really isn't any certainty other than the fact that we come together here with our human vulnerabilities and we do this work together and we commit ourselves to it. And I'm grateful to each of you who's done that in a variety of ways, because it does matter and it does transform bit by bit our worlds. So thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for the conversation.
Thank you, faculty. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and thank you for all of these years sharing yourselves with us. We're grateful for you, for your provocation, and for what you have to offer to this world. And now we come to a break in our program. We will invite you to come with us back to the narthex, where there are refreshments. A bit of housekeeping. There are also restrooms on the wings, off the wings of the narthex. And so you are welcome to come with us, enjoy the fellowship of our colleagues here, and take a moment of repose before we come back and join you in this space again for chapel at 11 with our talented students and our founding dean, Dr. Bill Leonard, bringing us the word. We'll see you at 11.